The cardboard boxes stacked in the hallway looked like tombstones marking the death of everything I thought I knew about family. Mom had been packing for 3 days straight, her movements sharp and deliberate, each item she wrapped feeling like another piece of my childhood being erased. The house in suburban Cleveland felt smaller with every passing hour, walls closing in on 18 years of memories that apparently meant nothing to her. I stood in the doorway of what used to be my bedroom, watching her tape up the last box with my name scrawled across it in black marker. The November wind rattled the windows, and the gray Ohio sky seemed to mirror the heaviness in my chest. This wasn't supposed to be how it ended, not after everything we'd been through together since Dad left 5 years ago. "Sarah, the movers will be here in an hour," she said, without looking up, her voice carrying that cold tone she'd perfected over the past month. Ever since I'd told her about my plans to defer college and pursue music instead, she'd treated me like a stranger living in her house. I cleared my throat, trying to find the courage I'd been building up for weeks. "Mom, can we please talk about this? I know you're disappointed, but I need you to understand." She whipped around, her hazel eyes blazing with an anger I'd never seen before. The stress lines around her mouth had deepened since she'd started planning this move to her sister's place in Phoenix. "Understand what, Sarah? That you want to throw your life away on some impossible dream? That you want to embarrass me further after I've already had to explain to everyone why my daughter is too ungrateful to accept the full scholarship to Northwestern?" The words hit me like physical blows. I pressed my back against the doorframe, feeling the familiar sting of tears I'd been fighting for days. "It's not about being ungrateful. I just need time to figure out who I am before I commit to a path that doesn't feel right." "Who you are?" She laughed bitterly, shoving the last of my childhood photos into a box. "You're 18 years old, Sarah. You don't know anything about who you are or what the real world is like. I've sacrificed everything to give you opportunities I never had, and this is how you repay me?" The November rain started pattering against the window, creating rivulets that blurred my view of the neighborhood where I'd grown up. Mrs. Patterson across the street was raking leaves in her front yard, probably wondering why the Hendersons were moving so suddenly. None of the neighbors knew the real story, that Mom couldn't bear the shame of having a daughter who'd chosen to disappoint everyone's expectations. "I'm not trying to hurt you," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sound of packing tape being pulled from its roll. "I just need you to believe in me the way you used to when I was little and sang for you in the kitchen." She paused, her hand stilling on the box. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the mother who used to braid my hair and tell me I could be anything I wanted, but it disappeared as quickly as it came, replaced by the hardened expression of someone who'd been let down too many times. "That was before I knew how cruel the world could be," she said quietly. "Before your father left us with nothing but debt and broken promises. Before I had to work 2 jobs just to keep this roof over our heads. Dreams don't pay bills, Sarah. Dreams don't provide security." I wanted to tell her that I understood her fears, that I knew how hard she'd worked to build a stable life for us after Dad's betrayal. But every time I tried to explain my feelings about music, about the way it made me feel whole in a way nothing else could, she shut down completely. The sound of a truck rumbling up our driveway broke the tension in the room. The movers had arrived early, their timing as perfect as a final curtain call. Mom straightened her shoulders and walked past me without another word, leaving me standing alone in my empty bedroom with nothing but the echo of her footsteps on the hardwood floors. I followed her downstairs, watching as she opened the front door to greet the moving crew. The cold November air rushed in, carrying the scent of wet leaves and the promise of winter. 3 men in navy blue uniforms stamped their feet on our welcome mat, their breath visible in small puffs as they surveyed the boxes stacked in our living room. "Ma'am, we'll have you loaded up and ready to go in about 3 hours, the crew chief said, consulting his clipboard. "Is there anything specific you need us to handle with extra care?" Mom glanced back at me for just a second before answering. "Just make sure everything gets to Phoenix in one piece. I'm starting over, and I can't afford to lose anything else." The word stung, because I knew she was talking about more than just furniture and dishes. She was talking about her relationship with me, about the daughter she felt she was losing to foolish dreams and youthful rebellion. But what she couldn't see was that I wasn't trying to leave her behind. I was trying to find myself so I could come back as someone she could be proud of. As the movers began carrying boxes to their truck, I retreated to the kitchen where so many of our important conversations had taken place over the years. The morning light filtered through the sheer curtains, casting familiar shadows across the linoleum floor where I'd danced as a child while Mom cooked dinner after long days at work. This was where she'd held me when I cried about Dad leaving, where she'd helped me with homework at the small round table that would soon be loaded onto a truck bound for Arizona. This was where I'd first sung the songs I'd written, hoping she'd understand that music wasn't just a hobby for me. It was as essential as breathing. But those days felt like they belonged to different people, a mother and daughter who still believed they could understand each other despite their differences. Now we were strangers sharing the same last name, connected by biology, but separated by dreams that seemed impossible to reconcile. I could hear Mom directing the movers upstairs, her voice carrying the efficient tone she used when she was trying to stay in control. She'd become an expert at compartmentalizing her emotions, boxing them up just like everything else in our house. It was a survival skill she'd learned the hard way, but it was also the thing that was driving us apart. The kitchen clock ticked steadily toward noon, each second bringing us closer to the moment when she'd drive away and leave me to figure out my own path. I'd already made arrangements to stay with my best friend Emma until I could find a job and get my own place, but the thought of being truly on my own for the first time felt both terrifying and liberating. I pulled out a chair and sat at the table where we'd shared thousands of meals, running my fingers along the scratches and stains that told the story of our life together. There was the ring mark from Mom's coffee mug, the gouge I'd accidentally made with a knife when I was 12, the place where my tears had left water stains during countless homework sessions. This table had witnessed our best and worst moments, and now it was going to Arizona while I stayed behind in Ohio, both of us starting over in ways we'd never planned. The irony wasn't lost on me that Mom was chasing her own fresh start while condemning me for wanting the same thing. The sound of boxes crashing in the hallway jolted me from my thoughts. One of the movers had dropped a container marked Sarah's Books, and I watched through the doorway as paperbacks scattered across the floor, my collection of poetry and song lyrics, the stories that had shaped my understanding of what it meant to be human. "Sorry about that," the mover called out, but Mom just waved him off. "Don't worry about it," she said. "Most of that stuff isn't important anymore." Her words felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Those books had been gifts from her, bought during weekend trips to used bookstores when money was tight, but she still wanted to nurture my love of words and music. Now they were just clutter to be cleaned up and forgotten. I knelt down to help gather the scattered books, each one triggering a memory of the mother who used to encourage my creativity instead of fearing it. There was the poetry collection she'd given me for my 16th birthday, the biography of Joni Mitchell we'd read together, the notebook where I'd written my first song about missing Dad. As I stacked the books back in their box, I realized that this was my chance to say everything I'd been trying to tell her for months. Not with another argument or desperate plea, but with the thing that had always connected us before everything went wrong. Words on a page, honest and raw and impossible to ignore. I grabbed a piece of paper from the notepad by the phone and sat back down at our kitchen table. The movers continued their work around me, but I blocked out their noise and focused on the most important letter I'd ever written. If she was determined to leave without understanding why I couldn't follow her predetermined path, then at least she'd know exactly what she was walking away from. The pen felt heavy in my hand as I began to write, pouring 18 years of love and frustration and hope onto the page. This letter would be my final gift to the mother who'd raised me to be strong and independent, even if she couldn't see that I was using those very qualities to forge my own way in the world. My hand trembled as I pressed the pen to paper, the words I'd been rehearsing for weeks finally finding their way onto the page. Outside, the movers continued loading our life into their truck, but in this moment, it felt like the whole world had narrowed down to this single sheet of paper and everything I needed to say. "Mom, by the time you read this, you'll probably be halfway to Phoenix, and I'll be trying to figure out how to live without the person who taught me everything about being strong. I know you think I'm throwing my life away, but I need you to know that everything you taught me is exactly why I have to try." I paused, listening to her voice in the hallway as she directed the movers away from a box marked "Fragile." Even in her anger, she was still protecting the things that mattered to her. I wondered if she'd ever see that I was just trying to protect the part of myself that mattered most to me. "Do you remember when I was 7, and you found me crying in my room because the kids at school said my drawings were weird? You sat on my bed and told me that being different wasn't something to fix. It was something to celebrate. You said the world needed people who saw things differently, who could show others new ways of thinking and feeling. You were talking about art then, but music is my art now. When I sit at the piano and find a melody that matches the feeling in my chest, it's the same thing as when I used to draw pictures of our dreams. It's me trying to make sense of a world that often doesn't make sense, trying to connect with people who might be feeling just as lost as I am." The November wind picked up outside, rattling the windows and sending leaves swirling across our front yard. I pulled my sweater tighter around my shoulders and continued writing, each word feeling like a small act of rebellion against the silence that had grown between us. I know you're scared. I know Dad leaving broke something in you that you're still trying to fix, and seeing me choose an uncertain path probably feels like watching me walk toward the same kind of disappointment. But Mom, what if it's different this time? What if following my heart leads somewhere beautiful instead of somewhere broken? I'm not Dad. I'm not going to disappear when things get hard or abandon the people who need me. I learned how to be loyal from watching you work 2 jobs and never complain, how to be determined from seeing you go back to school at 35 to get your nursing degree. Everything good about me came from your example. The sound of footsteps on the stairs made me look up. Mom was coming down with the last box from her bedroom, the one I knew contained her jewelry, and the few photos she'd kept of Dad. Her face was flushed from the physical work, and strands of her dark hair had escaped from the ponytail she'd pulled it into that morning. She glanced toward the kitchen where I was sitting, and for a moment, our eyes met across the chaos of the move. I saw something flicker in her expression, maybe curiosity about what I was writing, maybe just exhaustion from the emotional weight of the day, but she looked away quickly and handed the box to one of the movers. "That's the last of it from upstairs," she told them. "How much longer do you think you'll need?" "Another hour, maybe hour and a half," the crew chief replied. "We're making good time." I bent my head back to the letter, racing against the clock that was ticking away our final moments in this house. There was so much more I needed to say, so many years of conversations we'd never had, because we were both too proud or too scared to be completely honest. I know you think 18 is too young to make big decisions, but you were only 22 when you decided to keep me after Dad said he wasn't ready to be a father. Everyone told you that you were too young, that you should wait, that you didn't know what you were getting yourself into, but you trusted your heart. And look how that turned out. You raised a daughter who loves you enough to fight for her dreams even when it means fighting with you. The scholarship to Northwestern is incredible, and I know how proud you were when it came through. But Mom, I can't accept something that feels like a prison sentence just because it looks good on paper. I need to try music first, to see if I can make it work. If I fail, I'll go to college then. The opportunity will still be there. But this chance to chase my dreams while I'm young and brave enough to risk everything, this chance might not come again. The movers were working efficiently now, their voices creating a steady backdrop of professional coordination. I could hear them discussing the best way to load Mom's bedroom furniture, treating our most personal belongings like inventory items on a shipping manifest. There was something surreal about watching strangers handle the bed where Mom had comforted me through nightmares, the dresser where she'd kept my school photos and report cards. I wish you could see that I'm not running away from responsibility. I'm running toward it, taking control of my own life, making my own mistakes, learning who I am when no one else is telling me who I should be. Isn't that what you've been preparing me for all these years? I have a plan, even if it doesn't look like the kind of plan you'd make. Emma's parents said I can stay with them for a few months while I look for work. There's a coffee shop downtown that hosts open mic nights, and the owner said she might have a part-time position opening up. I've been writing songs for 2 years now, building up a repertoire that feels honest and real. Maybe it won't lead anywhere, but maybe it will lead somewhere amazing. I stopped writing and pressed my palms against my eyes, trying to hold back the tears that had been threatening all morning. The weight of this decision was crushing, but so was the weight of living a life that didn't belong to me. Mom had taught me to be strong, but she'd also taught me to be true to myself, even when she didn't realize that's what she was doing. The hardest part about all of this is that I learned how to dream by watching you. When Dad left, and you decided to go back to school, everyone said it was impossible. Single mothers don't have time for education, they said. You're too old to start over, they said. But you did it anyway, because you knew that settling for less than you deserved wasn't really living. That's all I'm doing, Mom. I'm following your example. I'm refusing to settle for a life that feels safe but empty. I'm choosing to believe that I can create something meaningful, even if the path isn't clear and the outcome isn't guaranteed. The sound of Mom's laughter drifted in from the living room, and I looked up to see her chatting with one of the younger movers about something on the television. For just a moment, she looked relaxed, almost happy, the way she used to look when she'd come home from work and find me practicing piano in the evenings. Those were the moments I treasured most, when the stress of bills and schedules and single parenting would fall away, and she'd sit on the couch listening to me play, sometimes humming along to melodies I'd created. She'd never admit it now, but music had been a source of joy for both of us before it became a source of conflict. I hope someday you'll be able to hear my songs and remember why you used to love listening to me play. I hope you'll hear the parts of yourself in my lyrics, the determination, the hope, the refusal to give up even when everything feels impossible. I hope you'll understand that becoming a musician isn't about rejecting the values you taught me. It's about using those values to build something beautiful. I know this letter won't change your mind about the move, and I know it won't make you suddenly support my decision. But I needed you to know that when you drive away today, you're not leaving behind a daughter who doesn't appreciate everything you've done. You're leaving behind a daughter who appreciates it so much that she's willing to risk everything to make you proud in her own way. The crew chief appeared in the kitchen doorway, consulting his clipboard one final time. "Ma'am, we're just about finished loading. Is there anything else you need us to take?" I looked around the kitchen that had been the heart of our home, taking in the empty countertops where Mom's coffee maker had lived, the bare walls where her small collection of artwork had hung, the vacant spaces where our life together had existed until this morning. "No, I think that's everything," I heard Mom say from the other room. Her voice sounded different now, flatter somehow, as if the reality of leaving was finally settling in. I turned back to the letter, knowing I only had a few more minutes before she'd be ready to lock the door behind us and drive away from Cleveland forever. The next words felt like the most important ones I'd ever written. "Mom, I love you more than any song I'll ever write, more than any dream I'll ever chase. That's why I have to do this, because the daughter you raised is brave enough to follow her heart, even when it leads her away from the path you'd choose for her, especially then. I hope Phoenix gives you everything you're looking for. I hope you find peace there, and new friendships, and maybe even some of the happiness that's been missing since Dad left. You deserve all of that and more. And maybe, if I'm really lucky with this music thing, someday I'll be able to buy you a plane ticket to come see me perform. Maybe you'll sit in the audience and remember that little girl who used to sing in the kitchen while you cooked dinner, and you'll understand that she never really went anywhere. She just grew up and learned how to sing for the whole world instead of just for you. I'll write to you every week, whether you write back or not. I'll tell you about the songs I'm working on, the places I'm playing, the people I'm meeting. And if you ever change your mind about us, if you ever want to see what I'm building with the foundation you gave me, you know where to find me. All my love, always, Sarah P.S. Check the piano bench before you leave. I left something there for you. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the center of the kitchen table, where Mom would be sure to see it. Then I walked to the living room where our old upright piano sat in the corner, soon to be loaded onto the truck with everything else. I lifted the bench seat and pulled out a CD I'd burned the night before, containing recordings of 5 songs I'd written over the past year. The label on the disc read, "For Mom, the soundtrack to everything you taught me," in my careful handwriting. These were the songs she'd never let me play for her, the ones that told the story of growing up in her shadow and learning to find my own light. If she listened to them in Phoenix, really listened, maybe she'd understand what I'd been trying to tell her all along. I placed the CD back in the piano bench and closed the lid, running my fingers along the keys one last time. This piano had been a gift from Mom when I turned 13, bought secondhand but lovingly restored. It was the foundation of every dream I'd built since then, and now it was moving to Arizona while I stayed behind to chase those dreams with just my voice and a guitar. The irony wasn't lost on me, but somehow it felt right. The piano had served its purpose. It had taught me to love music, to understand how melodies could carry emotions too complex for words alone. Now I needed to learn how to create that same magic with just the tools I could carry with me. "Sarah?" Mom's voice called from the front door. "The movers are finished. I need to do a final walkthrough." I took a deep breath and walked toward the sound of her voice, knowing that this was it, the moment when our old life officially ended and our separate new lives began. She was standing in the doorway with her purse slung over her shoulder and her car keys in her hand, looking smaller somehow in the empty house. "I'm leaving now," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Emma's mother said she'll pick you up at 3. "Yes," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Mom, don't," she interrupted, holding up her hand. "I think we've said everything there is to say, but we hadn't. Not really. There were 18 years of love and disappointment, and hope that couldn't be summarized in one argument or resolved in one conversation. Still, I nodded and stepped aside as she walked through the house one final time, checking closets and cabinets with the methodical precision she brought to everything. When she reached the kitchen, I saw her pause at the table where my letter waited. She looked at it for a long moment, then at me, her expression unreadable. I held my breath, hoping she might open it right then, that we might have one more chance to understand each other before she left. Instead, she picked up the letter and slipped it into her purse without reading it. "Take care of yourself, Sarah," she said quietly. "I hope you find what you're looking for." And then she was gone, walking out the front door and leaving me alone in our empty house with nothing but the echo of her footsteps and the weight of all the things we'd never learned how to say to each other. I stood at the window and watched her drive away, her silver Honda disappearing around the corner that led to the highway, and her new life in Phoenix. The November sky was growing darker, promising rain, or maybe even snow, and I pulled my sweater tighter around my shoulders as I prepared to lock the door on my childhood and step into whatever came next. 3 weeks had passed since Mom drove away, and Emma's house had become my temporary sanctuary in ways I hadn't expected. The Rodriguez family had welcomed me with the kind of warmth that made me ache for what I'd lost while being grateful for what I'd found. Mrs. Rodriguez cooked enough dinner for an army every night, insisting I needed to eat more, while Mr. Rodriguez had quietly cleared a space in their garage where I could practice guitar without disturbing the neighbors. Emma herself had been my anchor through the hardest days, the ones when I'd wake up reaching for my phone to call Mom before remembering that we weren't speaking. She'd found me crying in their guest room more times than I cared to admit, and each time she'd simply handed me tissues and sat with me until the storm passed. But tonight was different. Tonight, I was sitting at the small desk by the window in my temporary bedroom, writing my first letter to Mom as I'd promised. The lamp cast a warm circle of light across the stationery I'd bought at the drugstore, simple white paper that felt inadequate for everything I needed to say. Outside, December had arrived in Cleveland with its usual gray persistence. Snow was falling steadily, coating the Rodriguez's front yard in a blanket that reminded me of all the winters Mom and I had spent together, drinking hot chocolate and watching old movies when the weather trapped us inside. Dear Mom, it's been 3 weeks since you left, and I keep starting this letter and throwing it away because nothing I write feels big enough to bridge the distance between Cleveland and Phoenix. But I promised I'd write every week, and I'm already behind, so here goes. I got a job at Cafe Luna, the coffee shop I mentioned in my letter. It's not glamorous, mostly making lattes and wiping down tables, but the owner, Maria, is letting me play during their open mic nights on Fridays. Last week, 8 people listened to my songs, and 2 of them asked where they could buy my music. I don't have anything to sell yet, but it felt like a beginning. The tips aren't much, but combined with what I'm making hourly, I should be able to afford my own place by February. Emma's parents won't take any money for letting me stay here, which makes me feel guilty and grateful in equal measure. They remind me of you in some ways, the way they worry about whether I'm eating enough, whether I'm staying warm, whether I'm being safe in a world that can be dangerous for young women on their own. I paused, listening to the sounds of the Rodriguez family settling in for the night. Emma was on a video call with her boyfriend who went to college in Columbus, their laughter drifting through the thin walls. Mr. and Mrs. Rodriguez were watching the news in Spanish, their quiet commentary creating a comforting backdrop to my writing. This house was full of the kind of easy affection I'd grown up with before everything became complicated between Mom and me. Watching Emma hug her parents goodnight each evening made me realize how long it had been since Mom and I had shared that kind of casual intimacy. I've been thinking a lot about the last conversation we had, about how you said dreams don't pay bills. You're right about that, but I'm learning that jobs don't always pay bills either. Mrs. Patterson from across our old street got laid off from the factory where she'd worked for 15 years. Emma's cousin graduated with a business degree and has been looking for work for 8 months. There's no guarantee of security anywhere, is there? Maybe the real difference is that when you love what you do, even the uncertainty feels like it has purpose. When I'm performing, when I see someone in the audience connect with a song I wrote about missing you, or being scared, or feeling hopeful, it doesn't feel like work. It feels like the reason I was put here. The snow was falling heavier now, and I could see the streetlights creating cones of white that reminded me of stage lighting. Everything had started to look like metaphors since I'd been writing more seriously, as if the world was constantly offering up images for songs I hadn't written yet. Maria, my boss, told me something interesting yesterday. She said she opened Cafe Luna 12 years ago after her husband died, when everyone thought she was crazy for leaving her steady job as a bank teller to start a business she knew nothing about. She said the scariest part wasn't failing. It was the possibility that she might succeed, and then have to live up to her own dreams. I think I understand what she meant. It's one thing to talk about wanting to be a musician when it's just a fantasy. It's another thing entirely when people start paying attention, when the possibility becomes real. What if I actually make it? What if I don't? Both options are terrifying in different ways. I set down my pen and walked to the window, pressing my palm against the cold glass. The snow was accumulating on the sill, and I could see my breath fogging the window as I exhaled. Somewhere in Phoenix, Mom was probably dealing with her own kind of weather, the dry heat that never really went away, the endless sunshine that might feel oppressive after a lifetime of Midwest seasons. I wondered if she'd read my letter yet, if she'd listened to the CD I'd left in the piano bench. The not knowing was almost worse than any response she might have given. At least anger or disappointment would be engagement. Silence felt like erasure. I miss you, Mom. I miss the way you used to hum while you cooked dinner, the way you'd fall asleep reading on the couch and I'd cover you with a blanket. I miss having someone to call when something good happens, or when I need advice about stupid things, like whether my hair looks better curly or straight. Emma's mom tries to fill that role sometimes, and I love her for it, but it's not the same. She doesn't know that I like my eggs scrambled soft, or that I get anxious in crowds. She doesn't remember the first song I ever wrote, or the way I used to practice piano scales while you got ready for work in the mornings. Those might seem like small things, but they're the things that make someone feel known. And the hardest part about our fight isn't that you disagree with my choices. It's that I'm afraid you've decided not to know me anymore. A soft knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. Emma peeked her head in, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, and her face bright with the kind of contentment that came from talking to someone you loved. "How's the letter going?" she asked, settling on the edge of the bed. "You've been at it for an hour. It's harder than I thought it would be," I admitted, turning away from the window. How do you put 3 weeks of missing someone into words? Emma was quiet for a moment, considering. She'd been my closest friend since middle school. The one person who'd known me before music became the defining feature of my identity. She'd watched my relationship with Mom deteriorate over the past year, had listened to me cry about feeling misunderstood and trapped between loyalty and authenticity. "Maybe you don't have to put everything in one letter," she said finally. "Maybe you just tell her about right now, about this moment. The big stuff can wait until she's ready to hear it." She was right, of course. I'd been trying to solve 18 years of complicated mother-daughter dynamics in 3 pages of drugstore stationery. Maybe the goal wasn't to fix everything. Maybe it was just to keep the door open for whenever Mom was ready to walk through it. I'm going to tell you about my day yesterday because it was the kind of day that would have made you proud, even if you don't agree with the path that led to it. I was working the morning shift at the cafe when this older woman came in, probably around your age. She ordered a coffee and a muffin, and while I was getting her order ready, she mentioned that she'd heard me play the week before. She said my song about growing up reminded her of her own daughter, who'd moved across the country for graduate school. She said she'd been struggling with letting go, with trusting that she'd raised her daughter well enough to make good decisions on her own. Then she thanked me for helping her see that missing someone, and being proud of them could exist in the same space. "Mom, I wanted to call you right then, and tell you what she'd said. I wanted to share that moment when my music helped someone else understand something important about love and loss and family. I wanted you to see that what I'm doing isn't just self-indulgent dreaming. It's connecting with people, helping them feel less alone in the world." The memory was still fresh, and I could picture the woman's face clearly, the way her eyes had brightened when she talked about her daughter, the way she'd pressed an extra $5 bill into the tip jar before leaving. It had been validation in a way I hadn't expected, proof that my songs could matter to someone other than myself. But instead of calling you, I came home and cried for 20 minutes, because I realized that some of the most important moments of my life are going to happen without you knowing about them. You're going to miss my first real performance, my first review, maybe even my first album if I'm lucky enough to make one. And I'm going to miss telling you about all of it. That's the real cost of this choice, isn't it? Not just that we disagree about my future, but that we're not going to share it with each other. I knew leaving home would mean independence, but I didn't know it would mean this kind of loneliness. Emma had fallen asleep on my bed, curled up like a cat with one of my sweaters pulled over her shoulders. I smiled and reached for the extra blanket, covering her the same way I used to cover Mom when she'd fall asleep on our couch. Some gestures of care were universal, passed down through generations of women who'd learned to look after each other. The snow is really coming down now, and it reminds me of the winter when I was 10, and we got snowed in for 3 days. You taught me how to make bread from scratch because we couldn't get to the store, and we spent the whole weekend in our pajamas playing board games and singing songs from your old records. I kept asking you to tell me stories about when you were young, about the dreams you'd had before you became my mom. I wish I could remember all the stories you told me that weekend, but what I remember most clearly is the way your face looked when you talked about them. There was this light in your eyes, this spark of the person you'd been before responsibility took over. I see that same light sometimes when I'm on stage, and I wonder if that's what you're afraid of. Not that I'll fail, but that I'll succeed, and prove that the dreams you gave up might have been worth keeping. That was the heart of it, wasn't it? The thing neither of us had been brave enough to say during all our arguments. Mom had sacrificed her own ambitions to raise me, had chosen stability over passion so many times that she'd forgotten what it felt like to choose differently. My pursuing music wasn't just about my future. It was a reminder of all the futures she'd never explored. I don't want my success to feel like an indictment of your choices, Mom. You made the decisions you needed to make with the information you had at the time. You were young and scared and alone, and you did an incredible job of building a life for both of us. But now I'm young and scared too, and I'm trying to use everything you taught me about courage and determination to build something of my own. Maybe we can both be right. Maybe you were right to choose security when you needed it. And maybe I'm right to choose uncertainty while I still can. Maybe the real gift you gave me wasn't just the tools to build a stable life, but the confidence to take risks when the potential reward feels worth it. I was reaching the end of the second page, and my hand was starting to cramp from gripping the pen so tightly. Outside, the snow had created a quiet, muffled world that felt separate from the complications of family and dreams and growing up. In moments like this, I could almost pretend that Mom was just upstairs in her room, that I could go knock on her door and read her what I'd written. I'm going to end this letter the same way I ended my last letter to you, with a promise and a hope. I promise to keep writing, to keep you updated on my life, even if you don't respond. And I hope that someday, when you're ready, you'll want to be part of this journey, instead of just watching it from a distance. I hope Phoenix is everything you need it to be. I hope you're making friends with your neighbors and finding coffee shops that feel like home. I hope you're getting the fresh start you were looking for when you decided to leave Cleveland. And I hope that when you think of me, which I hope you do sometimes, you remember that I'm your daughter, in the best ways. I'm stubborn, because you taught me to fight for what I believe in. I'm independent, because you showed me how to take care of myself. I'm hopeful, because you raised me to believe that tomorrow could be better than today. All my love. Sarah. P.S. Emma's mom made tamales yesterday and insisted on sending you some. I'll figure out how to ship them to Phoenix without them spoiling. She says any friend of mine is family to her, which I think includes you by extension. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into an envelope, addressing it to Mom's new apartment in Phoenix. Tomorrow I'd walk to the post office and send it into the void, hoping it would find its way to someone who still wanted to hear from me. Emma stirred on the bed, opening her eyes and blinking in confusion before remembering where she was. "Did you finish?" she asked, stretching like a cat. "For now," I said. "There's always more to say, but I think that's enough for one letter." She sat up and looked at the envelope in my hands. "Do you really think she'll read it?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But I think I need to write them whether she reads them or not. It helps me remember who I am underneath all this uncertainty." Emma nodded thoughtfully. She understood better than most what it meant to love someone who couldn't love you back in the way you needed. Her own family had weathered storms that had taught her the difference between giving up on someone and giving them space to find their way back to you. "Want to watch a movie?" she asked. "Mom made hot chocolate, and she's been saving some of those marshmallows you like." I looked out the window one more time at the snow that was still falling, creating a world that felt both peaceful and isolated. Somewhere in that snow, my letter would soon be traveling toward Arizona, carrying all my love and longing and hope across a distance that felt impossible to bridge. But for now, I was here in this warm house with people who cared about me, about to drink hot chocolate and watch a movie with my best friend. It wasn't the life I'd planned, and it wasn't the relationship with Mom I'd hoped for, but it was real, and it was mine. "Yeah," I said, standing up from the desk and switching off the lamp. "That sounds perfect." As we walked toward the living room where Mrs. Rodriguez was waiting with mugs of hot chocolate topped with whipped cream, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Contentment with the present moment, even in the middle of all the uncertainty about the future. Maybe that was enough for now. Maybe learning to be okay with not knowing what came next was part of growing up, part of becoming the person Mom had raised me to be, even if she couldn't see it yet. February brought a warmth to Cleveland that felt almost rebellious after the harsh winter we'd endured. I was finally settled in my own apartment, a tiny studio above a bookstore that smelled like old paper and coffee, with windows that faced east so I could wake up to sunlight streaming across the hardwood floors. It wasn't much, but it was mine, paid for with tips from Cafe Luna and the small but growing income from weekend gigs around the city. The apartment came furnished with the basics: a bed, a small table, 2 chairs, and most importantly, space for my guitar and the keyboard I'd bought secondhand from a music store downtown. The walls were thin enough that I could hear Mrs. Chen practicing violin in the apartment next door, and she could probably hear me working through new songs late into the night. We'd developed an unspoken understanding, 2 musicians sharing the vulnerable act of creation through paper-thin walls. I'd written 4 letters to Mom since December, each one carefully crafted and sent with the same hopeful uncertainty. No responses had come, but I'd learned not to check the mailbox with the desperate anticipation that had characterized my first few weeks of independence. The letters had become less about expecting an answer, and more about maintaining a connection to someone who'd shaped every part of who I was becoming. Tonight was different, though. Tonight, I was preparing for my first real performance outside of Cafe Luna's intimate Friday night gatherings. The Grog Shop, a legendary venue in Cleveland Heights that had hosted everyone from local indie bands to touring acts with record deals, had offered me a slot opening for a folk singer from Nashville. It was just 30 minutes, but it felt like the most important 30 minutes of my life. I sat on my bed with my guitar, running through the set list I'd agonized over for weeks. 5 songs that told the story of the past 4 months: leaving home, learning independence, missing family, finding unexpected strength. The final song was one I'd written just last week, inspired by a dream where Mom and I were sitting in our old kitchen, talking and laughing like we used to before everything became complicated. The song was called Letters to Phoenix, and I'd been debating whether to include it in tonight's set. It felt too personal, too raw, like I'd be exposing something that should stay private. But Maria from Cafe Luna had heard me practicing it yesterday and insisted it was the strongest thing I'd written. Music is supposed to make people feel less alone, she'd said, wiping down the espresso machine with the methodical precision she brought to everything. That song will make every person in the audience think about someone they love but can't quite reach. A knock on my door interrupted my practice session. I opened it to find Emma standing in the hallway, holding a small bouquet of flowers and wearing the kind of smile that meant she had news. "These are for good luck tonight," she said, handing me the flowers, daisies, and baby's breath wrapped in brown paper. "And this is for celebration after." She produced a bottle of wine from her purse, the cheap kind we'd been drinking since we were old enough to buy it legally. But it felt precious in this moment, a symbol of friendship that had sustained me through the hardest transition of my life. "You didn't have to come all the way across town," I said, though I was grateful she had. Emma was in her 2nd semester at community college now, studying graphic design and working part-time at her family's restaurant. We saw each other less often than we had during those first weeks when I'd lived in her guest room, but our friendship had deepened in ways I hadn't expected. "Are you kidding? I wouldn't miss this for anything," she said, settling into one of my 2 chairs. "This is your real debut, Sarah. Everything changes after tonight." I wasn't sure if that was true, but it felt significant in a way that the cafe performances hadn't. Those had been comfortable, familiar, playing for people who already knew my story and were invested in my success. Tonight, I'd be performing for strangers who owed me nothing, who could just as easily scroll through their phones or head to the bar during my set. "I'm terrified," I admitted, setting my guitar aside. "What if I forget the words? What if my voice cracks? What if everyone just talks through my songs?" Emma reached across the small space between us and took my hands. "Then you'll be a real musician because that stuff happens to everyone. But Sarah, I've watched you perform dozens of times now, and you have something special. You make people want to listen." I'd been thinking a lot about what that something might be. It wasn't technical perfection. My guitar playing was competent, but not exceptional, and my voice was good, but not extraordinary. But when I performed, something happened that I couldn't quite explain. The space between me and the audience seemed to collapse, and for those few minutes, we were all sharing the same emotional experience. "I've been thinking about including Letters to Phoenix in the set," I said, voicing the uncertainty I'd been carrying all week. Emma's eyes lit up. She'd been there when I'd written that song, had listened to me work through draft after draft until the melody matched the ache in my chest. She'd also been there during the crying sessions that had inspired it, when missing Mom felt like a physical wound that wouldn't heal. "You have to," she said without hesitation. "That's the song that's going to make people remember you. But what if Mom somehow hears about it? What if someone records it and it ends up online and she finds out I've been writing songs about our relationship? Sarah, Emma's voice was gentle but firm. "You've been writing letters to her for months with no response. Maybe it's time to let your music do the talking instead." She was right, and I knew it. The letters had been my attempt to maintain a connection that maybe only existed in my imagination now. But the song was different. It was truth distilled into melody and rhythm, honest in a way that prose couldn't quite capture. We spent the next hour going through my stage outfit options, settling on jeans and a vintage blouse I'd found at a thrift store, something that looked intentional without trying too hard. Emma helped me with my makeup, keeping it simple but adding enough definition to ensure I wouldn't disappear under the stage lights. As we got ready, she told me about her classes, about the boys she'd been seeing, about her family's plans to expand the restaurant. Normal life continuing around the edges of my artistic aspirations, grounding me in the reality that success or failure tonight wouldn't change the fundamental things that mattered. By the time we left for the venue, the February evening had turned crisp and clear. The streets of Cleveland Heights were busy with college students and young professionals heading out for dinner and drinks, and I felt myself becoming part of the city's rhythm in a way I never had when I was living in the suburbs with Mom. This was what independence looked like, I realized. Not just living alone and paying your own bills, but becoming part of a community that existed beyond your family of origin. The barista at the coffee shop near my apartment knew my order. The guy at the record store had started setting aside albums he thought I'd like, and Mrs. Chen had begun leaving sheet music recommendations outside my door. The grog shop was smaller than I'd imagined, but packed with character. Exposed brick walls covered in posters from decades of performances, a low stage that put performers almost at eye level with the audience, and lighting that managed to be both intimate and dramatic. The sound engineer, a woman in her 40s with purple-streaked hair and arms covered in music-related tattoos, walked me through the setup with professional efficiency. "Just sing like you mean it," she said, as she adjusted my microphone. "The room has good acoustics, so trust that people will hear you even if you're not pushing too hard." The opening act, a folk singer named Daniel with a voice like aged whiskey and songs about heartbreak and redemption, drew a crowd that was attentive, but not overwhelming. Maybe 40 people scattered throughout the room, some at tables near the stage, others standing at the bar in the back. It felt like the perfect size for my first real show, big enough to matter, small enough not to be terrifying. Emma had claimed a table near the front, and I could see her giving me encouraging smiles while I did my final sound check. Daniel's set was winding down, and I could feel the familiar pre-performance butterflies that had become as much a part of the experience as tuning my guitar. "Ladies and gentlemen," Daniel said into the microphone, "please give a warm welcome to a talented young songwriter who's been making waves in the local scene, Sarah Henderson." The applause was polite but genuine, and I walked onto the small stage with my guitar, trying to remember everything I'd learned about stage presence from watching other performers. Make eye contact, speak clearly, let the music do most of the talking. "Hi, everyone," I said, adjusting the microphone stand. "I'm Sarah, and I'm grateful to be here tonight. These songs are about growing up, leaving home, and learning that sometimes love means giving each other space to become who we're meant to be." I started with Cleveland Winter, a song about finding beauty in harsh weather and harsher circumstances. It was a safe choice, upbeat enough to grab attention without being too emotionally demanding. The audience was listening, really listening, and I felt that familiar magic starting to happen, the moment when individual people became a collective experience. The second song, Emma's Kitchen, was about friendship that sustains you through impossible transitions. I'd written it after one of those late nights when Emma had sat with me while I cried about missing Mom, and I could see her tear up slightly as I performed it. A few people in the audience were nodding along, and I realized they were connecting the emotions to their own experiences of being cared for by unexpected sources. By the third song, Independence Avenue, about learning to be alone without being lonely, I could feel the room's energy shifting. People had stopped checking their phones, conversations at the bar had quieted, and even the servers were moving more carefully to avoid disrupting the performance. This was the feeling every musician chased, the moment when music became a shared language that transcended individual experience. The fourth song, February Thaw, was about hope returning after a difficult season, both literally and metaphorically. I'd written it after my first week in the studio apartment, when I'd realized that I was actually enjoying my independence despite missing the familiar comforts of home. The melody was optimistic without being naive, acknowledging that spring always follows winter, but never diminishes the reality of the cold. And then it was time for Letters to Phoenix. I paused, looking out at the audience that had become completely attentive over the past 20 minutes. This was the moment of truth, the song that felt too personal to share, but too important to keep to myself. "This last song," I said, "is about loving someone enough to let them make choices you don't understand. It's about writing letters to someone who might not read them, but writing them anyway because the alternative is letting go completely." I played the opening chords, a minor progression that somehow managed to sound both melancholy and hopeful. The melody was simple enough that people could follow it, but the lyrics were specific to my experience while being universal enough that anyone who'd ever missed someone could relate. "I've been writing letters to Phoenix, to a mother who won't write me back, telling her about the life I'm building, with the foundation she gave me to stand. She thinks I'm throwing it all away, these dreams that keep me up at night, but I learned how to be brave by watching her choose love over what felt safe and right." The chorus built with harmonies I'd worked out during late-night practice sessions, and I could see people in the audience connecting with the emotional core of the song. A woman at a table near the front had tears in her eyes, and a guy by the bar had stopped mid-conversation to listen. So I keep writing letters to Phoenix, even though the silence feels like stone, because sometimes love looks like letting go, and sometimes it looks like coming home. I hope she knows I think of her. When the Arizona sun goes down, I hope she knows she raised a daughter who won't give up, or give in, or back down. As I sang the final verse, something unexpected happened. My voice broke slightly on the line about hoping she was proud of me, not because of nerves or technical failure, but because the emotion of the song had caught up with me in a way it hadn't during practice. The vulnerability was raw and unplanned, and somehow it made the performance more honest than any polished delivery could have been. The room was completely silent as the last chord faded, and for a moment I wasn't sure if I'd connected or completely alienated the audience. Then the applause started, not the polite appreciation I'd received after the earlier songs, but genuine enthusiasm. People were standing, and I could see several audience members wiping their eyes. "Thank you," I said into the microphone, meaning it more than I'd ever meant those words before. "Thank you for listening." As I left the stage, the sound engineer grabbed my arm. "That was something special," she said. "You've got a gift for making people feel less alone in the world." Emma was waiting for me with tears streaming down her face, and a hug that lasted longer than usual. "Sarah, that was incredible. I'm so proud of you." Over the next hour, as Daniel prepared for his second set, person after person approached me to talk about the songs, especially Letters to Phoenix. A woman in her 50s told me it reminded her of her relationship with her own daughter, who'd moved away for college. A young man said it made him want to call his father after 3 years of not speaking. An older gentleman mentioned that he'd been estranged from his brother, and that the song had given him hope that reconciliation was possible. But the conversation that affected me most came from a woman about Mom's age, with graying hair and kind eyes, who approached me as I was packing up my guitar. "Honey," she said, her voice gentle but urgent, "I need to tell you something about that last song. I have a daughter about your age who moved to Los Angeles against my wishes 2 years ago. We haven't spoken since she left, and I've been too proud and too scared to reach out." She paused, her hands fidgeting with the strap of her purse. "But listening to you tonight, hearing how much love was in your voice when you sang about missing your mother, I realized I've been punishing both of us for something that was really about my own fear. I'm going to call her tomorrow." I felt tears spring to my eyes, understanding for the first time the real power of what I'd been trying to do with my music. It wasn't just about expressing my own feelings. It was about creating a bridge that others could cross to reach the people they loved but couldn't quite connect with. "I hope the conversation goes well," I managed to say, my voice thick with emotion. "Me too," she said. "And honey, your mother is lucky to have a daughter who loves her enough to keep writing those letters. Sometimes it takes us parents a while to realize that our children's dreams aren't rejections of us. They're extensions of everything we taught them about being brave." As Emma and I walked back to my apartment that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, a sense of purpose that went beyond my own artistic ambitions. The performance had been successful in ways I hadn't expected, not just because people had responded to the music, but because the music had helped people connect with parts of themselves they'd been avoiding. "That woman who talked to you about her daughter," Emma said as we climbed the stairs to my studio. "Did you see her face when she was leaving? She looked like someone who'd just remembered something important." I had seen it, and it made me think about all the other mothers and daughters, fathers and sons, siblings and friends, who might be sitting in their own version of silence, waiting for someone to give them permission to love each other again despite their differences. 3 months later, in May, my phone rang at 7 in the morning while I was getting ready for my Saturday shift at Cafe Luna. I'd become something of a regular performer around Cleveland by then, playing at various venues throughout the city and slowly building a following of people who came specifically to hear my songs. The tips were getting better, and I'd even sold a few copies of a homemade EP I'd recorded in a friend's makeshift studio. But success felt incomplete without Mom knowing about it. I'd continued writing letters every few weeks, documenting my small victories and daily struggles, sending them into the Arizona desert like messages in bottles. The silence had become familiar, if not comfortable, and I'd learned to find validation in other places. Audience responses, Maria's encouragement, Emma's unwavering support. The phone call changed everything. Sarah? The voice was tentative, older sounding than I remembered, but unmistakably familiar. Mom? I nearly dropped the phone, my heart racing so fast I thought I might pass out. Mom, is that really you? Yes, sweetheart, it's me. I could hear her crying, the sound carrying across 2,000 miles of distance that suddenly felt like nothing at all. I'm sorry it took me so long to call. I'm sorry for so many things. I sank onto my bed, overwhelmed by emotions I'd been storing up for 8 months. Relief, joy, anger, hope, confusion. All of it crashed over me at once, leaving me unable to form coherent words. I read all your letters, she continued, her voice breaking. Every single one. And I listened to your CD so many times I wore it out. I had to buy a new CD player because I kept playing it over and over. Why didn't you write back? The question came out sharper than I'd intended. Months of hurt condensing into those 5 words. Because I was ashamed, she said simply. Because I realized I'd been so afraid of losing you that I'd pushed you away. Because I didn't know how to admit that I was wrong about everything. She told me about her first months in Phoenix, about how the silence between us had eaten away at her in ways she hadn't expected. She'd made friends with her neighbor, a woman named Patricia, whose son was a professional musician in Nashville. Patricia had listened to Mom's story and then asked a question that changed everything. Are you punishing your daughter for having the courage you wish you'd had at her age? It took me months to answer that honestly, Mom said. But yes, I think I was. I gave up my dreams when I got pregnant with you, and I told myself it was noble sacrifice. But watching you refuse to give up yours, it made me remember all the things I'd wanted to do and never tried. She'd been following my career from a distance, she told me. She'd found videos of my performances online, had read the few reviews I'd gotten in local papers. She'd even called Cafe Luna once, just to hear my voice when I answered the phone, though she'd hung up without identifying herself. I saw the video of you performing Letters to Phoenix, she said, and I realized she was talking about a recording someone had posted from a show last month. Sarah, that song. It broke my heart and put it back together at the same time. I realized you weren't singing about giving up on me. You were singing about loving me enough to keep trying. We talked for 3 hours that morning, missing work and obligations to fill in 8 months of silence with words we'd been saving up. She told me about her job at a hospital in Phoenix, about the friends she'd made, about how she'd been seeing a therapist to work through her fears about family and loss and letting people down. I told her about my apartment, about the growing network of musicians I'd connected with, about the small but steady income I was making from performances, and the part-time job that gave me flexibility to pursue music. Most importantly, I told her about how her example of strength and determination had guided every decision I'd made since leaving home. I want to come visit, she said, as our conversation was winding down. If you want me to. I want to see this life you've built, want to hear you perform in person. Yes, I said without hesitation. Yes, I want that more than anything. We made plans for her to fly to Cleveland in 2 weeks, timing the visit around a show I had booked at a larger venue downtown. It would be the first time she'd hear me perform since those kitchen concerts of my childhood, and the thought was both thrilling and terrifying. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment for a long time, processing the conversation that had changed everything I thought I knew about our relationship. The letters had worked, not in the way I'd expected, but in the way that mattered most. They'd kept the door open until Mom was ready to walk through it. The night of Mom's visit, I stood backstage at the Beachland Ballroom, peeking through the curtain at the crowd that had gathered for the monthly showcase of local songwriters. It was my biggest audience yet, nearly 200 people, including music bloggers, other musicians, and fans who'd been following my journey since those early days at Cafe Luna. But the person I was most nervous to perform for was sitting at a small table near the front, looking simultaneously proud and terrified. Mom had arrived in Cleveland 3 days earlier, and we'd spent the time carefully rebuilding our relationship through long conversations, shared meals, and small adventures around the city that had become my home. She'd met Emma and the Rodriguez family, had seen my tiny apartment and declared it perfect for who you are right now, and had even spent an afternoon at Cafe Luna, watching me work and meeting the customers who'd become part of my extended family. Most importantly, she'd listened, really listened, as I played her the songs I'd written over the past year, including the ones inspired by missing her. "You ready?" asked Jake, the sound engineer who'd become a friend over the months I'd been performing around Cleveland. "Your mom looks like she's about to burst with pride, and you haven't even started yet." I looked out at Mom again, seeing her check her phone for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. She'd been nervous all day, more anxious about my performance than I was. It was as if she was finally understanding that this wasn't just a phase or a rebellion. This was my life, my calling, the thing I was meant to do with the talents she'd helped nurture. "I'm ready," I said, and meant it. The host introduced me with more enthusiasm than I'd expected, mentioning my growing reputation in the local music scene and the fact that several of my songs had started getting radio play on the city's independent station. The applause was warm and genuine as I walked onto the stage with my guitar, no longer the terrified teenager who'd left home 8 months earlier, but a young woman who'd learned to trust her own voice. "Good evening, everyone," I said into the microphone, my voice steady and confident. "I'm Sarah Henderson, and I'm grateful to be here tonight. These songs are about leaving home, finding yourself, and learning that sometimes the people who love us most need time to understand who we're becoming." I opened with Independence Avenue, the song about learning to be alone without being lonely. It had become my signature piece, the one that audiences always responded to most strongly. Tonight was no exception. I could see people nodding along, connecting with the universal experience of stepping into adulthood and all its uncertainties. The second song was new, one I'd written just last week called Phoenix Rising. It was about second chances and new beginnings, inspired by Mom's courage in leaving everything familiar to start over in Arizona. As I sang it, I could see her dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, recognizing herself in the lyrics about finding strength and starting fresh. Midway through the set, I paused to address the audience directly. "There's someone here tonight who's very special to me," I said, looking directly at Mom. "My mother flew here from Phoenix to see me perform, and it means more to me than I can express. She's the person who taught me everything I know about being brave, even when being brave means making choices that scare the people who love you." The audience applauded, and I could see Mom crying openly now, no longer trying to hide her emotions. She mouthed, "I love you," across the crowded room, and I felt a completeness I hadn't experienced since the day she'd driven away from our Cleveland house. I ended the set with Letters to Phoenix, the song that had started this whole journey toward reconciliation. But tonight, it felt different. Not like a plea for understanding, but like a celebration of love that had survived distance and misunderstanding, and the complicated process of two people learning to see each other as individuals, rather than just roles. I've been writing letters to Phoenix, to a mother who finally wrote me back, telling me she's proud of the life I'm building. With the foundation she gave me to stand, I'd changed the lyrics slightly, updating them to reflect our new reality. The audience noticed, and several people who'd heard the original version smiled at the evolution. This was what growth looked like in real time. Not just personal development, but the transformation of relationships that were strong enough to survive change. The applause after my set was the longest and loudest I'd ever received. People stood, whistled, and called for an encore, but all I could see was Mom, pushing through the crowd to reach the stage, her face radiant with pride and joy and relief. "You were magnificent," she said, as she hugged me, holding on longer than she had since I was a child. "I finally understand what you've been trying to tell me. This isn't just what you do, this is who you are." Later that night, we sat in my apartment sharing a bottle of wine and talking about the future. Mom had decided to extend her visit by a few days, wanting to spend more time in the city that had shaped my independence. More importantly, she'd started making plans to visit regularly, to be part of my life in ways that honored both my need for autonomy and our connection as mother and daughter. "I have something for you," she said, reaching into her purse. She pulled out a small wrapped package that I recognized immediately. It was the jewelry box that had sat on her dresser for as long as I could remember, the one that had belonged to her mother. "Mom, I can't take this," I said, overwhelmed by the gesture. It's too important. That's exactly why you should have it, she replied, pressing the box into my hands. It's been passed down through 3 generations of women who had to be brave in different ways. Now it's your turn. Inside the box was her grandmother's ring, a simple band with a small diamond that caught the light from my apartment's single lamp. But more than the jewelry, it was the symbolism that took my breath away, the recognition that I was carrying forward a legacy of strong women who'd made difficult choices in pursuit of authentic lives. I want you to know, Mom continued, that I'm not just proud of your music. I'm proud of the woman you've become. You handled this whole situation with more grace and maturity than I did, and that's because of who you are, not because of anything I taught you. You taught me everything, I said, slipping the ring onto my finger where it fit perfectly. You taught me to be independent, to work hard, to never give up on the people I love. This whole year has been me using your example to build something you couldn't have imagined but definitely made possible. As we talked late into the night, I realized that our relationship hadn't gone back to what it was before. It had evolved into something better. We were no longer just mother and daughter bound by biology and history, but 2 women who'd chosen to love and support each other, despite having different visions of what success looked like. The letters to Phoenix had served their purpose, creating a bridge across the distance between us until we were both ready to meet in the middle. Now we could start building something new together, a relationship based on mutual respect and understanding, rather than expectations and fears. 3 months later, I received a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a professional recording setup, microphones, audio interface, software, everything I needed to start making higher quality recordings of my songs. The note that came with it was brief, but perfect. For my daughter, who taught me that dreams aren't luxuries, they're necessities. I can't wait to see where your music takes you next. All my love, Mom. P.S. I've started taking piano lessons again. Maybe we can play together next time I visit. I read the note 3 times before it fully sank in. Mom wasn't just accepting my chosen path. She was investing in it, supporting it, maybe even inspired by it to rediscover parts of herself she'd put aside years ago. That evening, I set up the recording equipment and spent hours experimenting with the new possibilities it offered. The sound quality was incredible, professional enough that I could start thinking about putting together a real album instead of just homemade EPs. As I played through my catalog of songs, I realized they told a complete story: leaving home, learning independence, missing family, finding strength, and ultimately discovering that love doesn't require agreement, just understanding and respect. I started working on a new song that night, one that would close the album I was beginning to envision. It was called Coming Home, and it was about the realization that home isn't a place you return to. It's a feeling you carry with you, built from the love of people who believe in your dreams, even when they don't understand them. Home is not the house where I was raised, or the city where I learned to drive. Home is in the voices that still cheer for me when I'm brave enough to come alive. Home is in my mother's laughter when she hears me sing these songs. Home is knowing that her love will follow me, no matter how far I travel on. The song wrote itself over the course of several weeks, and when it was finished, I recorded it using Mom's gift. The quality was everything I'd hoped for: professional enough to submit to radio stations and music blogs, clear enough to capture every nuance of emotion in my voice. But before I sent it anywhere else, I burned it onto a CD and mailed it to Phoenix with a note of my own. Dear Mom, this is the song I've been trying to write since the day you drove away. It's about realizing that you gave me the most important gift any parent can give a child: the confidence to be myself, even when being myself means disappointing you. Thank you for loving me enough to let me find my own way, and for being brave enough to find your way back to me. All my love, always, Sarah P.S. I can't wait to hear you play piano again. Music has always been the language we speak best together. 2 weeks later, my phone rang on a Saturday morning. I knew before I answered that it would be Mom, and I knew from the tone of her voice that she'd listened to the song. Sarah, she said, her voice full of tears and laughter and joy. You're going to be a star, and I'm going to be the proudest mother in the audience every single time. As we talked about my upcoming performances, the album I was planning, and her progress with piano lessons, I realized that the letters to Phoenix had accomplished something I'd never expected. They hadn't just brought us back together, they'd helped us become the mother and daughter we were always meant to be, connected by love, but free to be ourselves. The story that had started with a moving truck and harsh words had evolved into something beautiful, a testament to the power of persistent love, honest communication, and the courage to keep reaching for each other across whatever distance divides us. Sometimes coming home means going back to where you started. Sometimes it means bringing the people you love into the new world you've created for yourself. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it means discovering that home was never a place at all. It was always the love that travels with you, no matter how far you roam.